The night my husband brought his mistress into our house, my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me my daughter and I could sleep in the garage if I planned on making a scene. I still remember the sound of the rain hitting the gutters that night. Hard rain, Tennessee summer rain, the kind that smells like wet pavement and old leaves. It was 8:17 p.m. because I looked at the microwave clock the second Wayne walked through the front door with that girl behind him. At first I honestly thought she was a customer, maybe somebody needing emergency air conditioning repair. Wayne owned a small HVAC company outside Knoxville and people called him at strange hours all the time. Then I noticed the pink suitcase, and the way she smiled at him. Not nervous, not embarrassed. Comfortable. Like she'd already been there before. Wayne shut the front door behind them and shook rainwater off his boots onto the floor I'd mopped that morning. "Deb," he said casually, "we need to talk." That sentence alone can make a woman sick after 22 years of marriage. I stood there holding a dish towel while spaghetti boiled behind me on the stove. Emily was in the living room doing homework on the coffee table with that old stuffed rabbit she'd had since kindergarten tucked under her arm. The girl stepped forward and gave me this tiny little wave. "Hi, I'm Kayla. 26 years old maybe. Long blonde hair, white nails, too much lip gloss, pretty in the polished social media kind of way." Then Wayne said the sentence that split my life clean in half. "Kayla's gonna stay here for a while." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to understand what I'd just heard. "What?" Wayne sighed like I was being difficult already. "Don't start yelling." "Wayne," I said slowly, "who is this woman?" Before he answered, another voice floated out from my kitchen. "Well, somebody has to stay calm tonight. Patricia." My mother-in-law walked in carrying 2 glasses of sweet tea like this was Sunday supper instead of a public execution. That was the moment I realized this had been planned. She already knew. Probably for weeks. Maybe longer. Patricia handed 1 glass to Kayla. "Not me. Never me." Wayne rubbed the back of his neck and said, "Deb, me and you haven't been happy in a long time." I stared at him. "You brought another woman into my house while your daughter's 10 feet away." 11, Emily said quietly from the living room. Nobody answered her. Kayla shifted awkwardly and gave me this fake soft expression women use when they want credit for pretending to care. I never meant to hurt anybody. I looked right at her. "Then you picked a strange way to spend your Thursday night." Wayne immediately got irritated. "See, this is exactly what I mean. Everything turns dramatic with you." I actually felt my mouth fall open. For years I'd defended this man. When his business struggled, I picked up extra shifts at the dental office. When he got behind on taxes, I let him refinance my car. When he said his stress was temporary, I believed him. And now there was some little blonde woman standing in my kitchen wearing my old Tennessee sweatshirt while he talked to me like I was the problem. Patricia sat down at the table and crossed her arms. "Deborah, honey, nobody's trying to humiliate you." I laughed again, this time sharper. "Well, that's comforting, Patricia, because you're all doing an incredible job accidentally." Wayne exhaled hard through his nose. "Look, Kayla's staying here. I'm not going to sneak around anymore. You brought her into our home. It's my house." That one landed exactly the way he intended. The house had belonged to Wayne's father before he died. Legally, it was Wayne's inheritance. And Wayne knew I worried about that, especially lately, because money had been tight for months. I folded the dish towel slowly and set it on the counter. "Tell me something honestly," I said. "How long has this been going on?" Nobody answered right away. Patricia took a sip of tea. Finally, Kayla spoke. "About 8 months. 8 months. I thought about all the dinners I cooked, all the laundry I folded, all the nights Wayne claimed he was working late. 8 months. Emily appeared quietly in the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mom?" I looked at her face and felt something inside me crack open. Not loud, not dramatic, just a deep, tired break. Wayne noticed her standing there and immediately got annoyed. "Emily, go back in the living room." "No," I snapped. The room went silent. That surprised everybody, including me. Wayne stared at me. "You want to do this in front of her?" "You already did." Rain hammered the windows. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Patricia stood up carefully like she was trying to manage unstable people. "Everybody needs to cool down." Wayne pointed toward the garage door. "If you're gonna keep acting like this, maybe you and Emily should sleep out there tonight." I stared at him. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment as long as I live. Not because he said it, because he meant it. Emily's eyes filled immediately. That little girl looked terrified. And suddenly I didn't care about the house anymore, or the marriage, or winning. I only cared about getting my daughter somewhere safe from the ugliness standing in that kitchen. I walked past Wayne without another word. Patricia called after me. Now don't be irrational. I turned around. For 22 years, I said quietly, I cleaned this house, paid bills in this house, raised your granddaughter in this house. And you brought a stranger into it like I was already dead. Patricia opened her mouth but nothing came out. For once. I went upstairs and started packing. Not suitcases. Trash bags. Because my hands were shaking too hard to do anything properly. Emily sat on the bed hugging her rabbit while I shoved clothes into black plastic bags from the laundry room. Mom, she whispered, are we homeless? I stopped moving. God. That question nearly killed me. I knelt beside her and pushed wet hair out of her face. No, baby, I said softly. We're just leaving a house that forgot how to be a home. Downstairs, I could hear Patricia talking in low, nervous tones. Wayne sounded irritated already. And Kayla laughed once. Just once. Bright and stupid. I zipped Emily's backpack myself because her little hands were trembling too badly. Then I grabbed the car keys. When we walked downstairs carrying trash bags, Wayne looked stunned for a second. Like maybe he thought I'd cry and beg instead. You're really leaving? I looked at him. You already left, Wayne. Then Emily and I walked into the rain. The windshield wipers barely kept up as we drove east through the dark toward Asheville. Emily fell asleep about 40 minutes into the drive with her rabbit tucked under her chin. And somewhere near the North Carolina line, I finally started crying so hard I had to pull over beside a gas station. Not because I missed Wayne. Because I realized I had spent half my life loving someone who could watch his child stand in a hallway terrified and still choose himself. I pulled into my mother's driveway a little after midnight. The rain had finally slowed down to a mist and fog hung low over the pasture behind her farmhouse. The porch light was on, casting this soft yellow glow across the gravel driveway like she'd been waiting for me. Maybe she had. I turned off the engine and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. Emily was asleep in the passenger seat with her cheek pressed against the window, still holding that stuffed rabbit under her chin. For one ugly second, I almost drove away again. I hadn't lived with my mother since I was 19 years old. And after years of tension between her and Wayne, we barely spoke more than twice a year. Wayne used to tell me my mother looked down on us. She thinks money makes her smarter than everybody else, he'd say. And over time, I stopped calling as much, stopped visiting, stopped answering half her messages. Funny how isolation can look so much like loyalty when you're married to the wrong person. The front door opened before I even got out of the car. My mother stood there in a pale blue robe and reading glasses, arms folded against the cool mountain air. She looked older than the last time I saw her in person. Smaller somehow. But not weak. Never weak. She took one look at my face and didn't ask a single question. Bring the child inside before she catches pneumonia, she said. That was my mother. No dramatic gasping, no performance. Just movement. Action. I woke Emily gently and we carried our trash bags up the porch steps like refugees from our own lives. Inside the house smelled like coffee and lemon furniture polish. Exactly the same as when I was a little girl. Emily stood quietly in the kitchen while my mother heated soup on the stove without speaking. Then she noticed the trash bags. Not luggage. Trash bags. Her eyes flicked toward me once. That was all. You hungry, sweetheart? She asked Emily softly. Emily nodded. My mother poured her soup into one of the old ceramic bowls with painted strawberries around the rim. The same bowls she'd had since the 80s. Emily sat down and ate silently while I stood near the sink, trying not to completely fall apart. My mother finally looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug. Well, she said calmly, tell me what that fool did. And that was it. That tiny opening. The minute she said it, I started crying so hard I had to sit down. Not graceful crying either. The kind where your chest hurts and your nose runs and you can't breathe correctly. I covered my face with both hands. Mom, I whispered. They said we weren't their class anymore. The kitchen got very quiet. My mother slowly removed her glasses. Then she leaned back in her chair and said 4 words I still hear in my head sometimes. Get in the car, big mistake. But then something unexpected happened. She didn't rush for revenge. Didn't grab a phone. Didn't start screaming about lawyers. Instead, she stood up, refilled my coffee, and handed me a dish towel. Wipe your face, she said. You look like you lost a bar fight. I laughed through tears before I could stop myself. And honestly, that tiny laugh probably saved me. Emily eventually fell asleep on the couch under one of my mother's quilts, while the two of us sat at the kitchen table after 1 in the morning. I told her everything. About Kayla. About Patricia. About Wayne saying the house was his. About the garage. She listened without interrupting once. The only time her expression changed was when I admitted Wayne had been struggling financially for almost a year. How bad, she asked. I don't know exactly. That answer bothered her immediately. What do you mean you don't know? I rubbed my forehead. He handled most of the business stuff. My mother stared at me for a long moment. Deborah, she said carefully, did you sign anything for him? I looked down at my coffee, and suddenly my stomach dropped. There had been papers. Lots of papers over the years. Business loans, equipment financing, a line of credit during COVID. Wayne would bring things home late at night and say stuff like, just routine paperwork, or, the bank needs both signatures. Sometimes he'd sound irritated if I asked questions. Once he actually said, don't embarrass me in front of people who understand business. At the time, I thought supporting your husband meant trusting him. Now I wasn't so sure. My mother saw the panic hit my face. Oh, honey, she muttered quietly. At 8 the next morning, she called Frank DeLucci. Frank had been friends with my father years ago. 76 years old Army veteran, suspenders every day of his life, and somehow permanently smelling like cigars and peppermint. By 10:30, he was sitting at my mother's kitchen table going through old paperwork while muttering things under his breath. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That's never a reassuring phrase from an attorney. I sat across from him, twisting my wedding ring around my finger while he flipped through loan documents. Finally, he looked at me. Did your husband explain any of this to you? Not really. Frank removed his glasses. Well, he should have. My mother crossed her arms beside the stove. How bad? Frank tapped one paper. This right here is a personal guarantee. I blinked. A what? It means if Wayne's business sinks, creditors can come after both of you personally. I honestly felt cold all over. But he said, Frank cut me off gently. I know what he said. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Outside, one of my mother's horses snorted somewhere near the fence line. Frank kept going. There's also a joint business credit line, equipment financing, and this... He held up another paper. This one concerns me. My mother leaned closer. What is it? Frank frowned. Large equipment transfers. I didn't understand. He explained slowly. Some of Wayne's company property appeared to have been moved recently. Vehicles, equipment, payments routed through different accounts. Some connected to Kayla. My mother's face hardened immediately. He's hiding assets. Frank nodded slightly. Looks that way. I felt sick. Not dramatic sick. Real sick. Like my body suddenly understood before my brain did that my marriage hadn't just fallen apart. It had been rotting quietly for a long time. My mother looked at me carefully. Did he isolate you from people? I stared at her. And for the first time in years, I answered honestly. Yes. That word sat between us a while. Then she sighed softly and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I never hated that man because he was poor, she said. I hated him because every year you got a little smaller around him. I couldn't even argue. Because she was right. Around lunchtime, Emily wandered into the kitchen wearing one of my mother's oversized sweatshirts. She looked sleepy and confused. Grandma! Yes, sweetheart. Can I feed the horses later? My mother smiled for the first time all day. Course you can. Emily nodded, then looked at me carefully. That child was watching everything. Children always know more than adults think. A little later, while Frank was making copies of documents, Emily quietly picked up my phone from the kitchen table. I didn't notice until she handed it back 10 minutes later. What were you doing, baby? I deleted Facebook. I blinked. Why? She shrugged. So you stopped looking at pictures that make you cry? That nearly broke me all over again. That evening after dinner, my mother stood beside me on the porch while fog rolled over the mountains. You listen to me carefully, she said. People like Wayne only feel powerful when somebody else feels small. Don't help him by staying broken. I stared out at the dark pasture. I don't even know where to start. She slipped her glasses back on. Yes, you do, she said quietly. You start by understanding this isn't your shame to carry. Inside the house, Emily laughed at something Frank said from the kitchen. And for the first time since leaving Knoxville, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt safe. 2 weeks after I arrived at my mother's house, she handed me an apron and told me to stop staring out windows like a widow in an old country song. I'm grieving, I muttered. You're avoiding, she corrected. That was Evelyn Harper in a nutshell. No patience for self-pity once it stopped being useful. I was standing in her kitchen in fuzzy socks, and one of her old cardigans holding a cup of coffee I'd reheated 3 times. Outside, fog rolled over the pasture while Emily helped feed the horses with one of the neighbor boys, and for a second I almost forgot my entire life had collapsed. Then my phone buzzed. Wayne. I let it ring. Buzz again. Then a text came through. You telling people I threw you out? I stared at the screen a moment before typing back. "You brought your girlfriend into our house, Wayne. What version sounds better to you?" No response after that. Just silence. Funny how men disappear once they realize you're no longer begging. Still, the reality of my situation settled heavier every day. Frank kept finding financial messes tied to my name. Loans. Guarantees. Outstanding balances. Apparently, while I'd been clipping grocery coupons and stretching leftover casseroles into second meals, Wayne had been quietly moving money around like a man trying to outrun a flood. One afternoon, Frank spread papers across my mother's dining room table and looked at me over his reading glasses. "You need income of your own immediately." I felt embarrassed hearing that at 48 years old. Not because he was wrong, because he was right. I'd spent so much time supporting Wayne's business that somewhere along the line I stopped building security for myself. That realization stung worse than Kayla. So 3 weeks later I started working mornings at Buc-ee's. If you're not from the South, you may not understand the strange emotional grip Buc-ee's has on people. It's not just a gas station. It's practically a religion with brisket sandwiches. The one outside Asheville sat right off Interstate 40, enormous and glowing at 5 in the morning like a beacon for exhausted travelers and retired couples towing RVs. My shift started at 5:30 a.m. in the bakery section. Hairnet, apron, non-slip shoes that made my feet ache halfway through the day. The first morning I cried in the employee bathroom before clocking in. Not loud crying. Just quiet tears while staring at myself under fluorescent lighting thinking, this cannot be my life. Then a woman named Marlene walked in holding a breakfast burrito and caught me sniffling. Marlene was 63, twice divorced, smoked Virginia Slims in the parking lot during breaks, and had eyeliner tattooed permanently onto her eyelids sometime around 1998. She looked me up and down. "You done?" she asked. I laughed despite myself. "Probably not." "Well," she said, unwrapping her burrito, "try not to drip mascara into the cinnamon rolls." That was the beginning of our friendship. Over the next few weeks, those women at Buc-ee's slowly stitched me back together without ever acting like they were doing it. There was Marlene, Tanya, whose husband ran off with a Pilates instructor in Chattanooga, and Denise, who believed every problem in life could be improved with gravy. One morning, while we rolled biscuit dough before sunrise, Marlene finally asked the question everybody already knew the answer to. "So what exactly did this fool husband do?" I kept working. "He brought his girlfriend home." Tanya stopped buttering trays. "To the house. "Yes." Marlene blinked slowly. "Well, that takes confidence usually reserved for drunk men and raccoons." I laughed so hard I accidentally dropped a scoop of dough. That became the rhythm of my days after that. Work, coffee, flour on my jeans, conversations with women who'd survived things. And every once in a while, moments where I realized I could still laugh without feeling guilty for it. Emily started changing too. The first week at my mother's house, she barely spoke. She slept curled against the wall like she expected someone to come take things away again. But little by little, she relaxed. She helped my mother water tomatoes in the evenings, fed horses at the neighboring farm, started smiling again. One Saturday afternoon, I walked outside and found her laughing while trying to brush a stubborn pony named Earl. I stood there watching quietly from the porch. My mother stepped beside me holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "She's lighter here," she said softly. I nodded. Then my mother added, "So are you." I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Meanwhile, Wayne's life seemed determined to turn into a Facebook commercial for bad decisions. Kayla posted constantly. Fancy brunches? Selfies in mirrored elevators? Captions about protecting your peace. One photo showed her standing in my old kitchen wearing one of Wayne's flannel shirts while drinking wine out of my grandmother's crystal glass. The caption read, "Some women survive, some women upgrade." Marlene saw that one during lunch break. She snorted so hard sweet tea nearly came out her nose. "Honey," she said, "any woman quoting Pinterest while stealing somebody's husband ain't upgraded. She's on layaway." Even I had to laugh at that. But underneath the humor, things were getting uglier financially. Wayne called more often now. Not to apologize. To complain. One night he accused me of turning people against him. "All I did was leave," I said. "You're making me look bad." I stood in my mother's kitchen staring at the dark window over the sink. "Wayne," I said quietly, "you moved your girlfriend into the house while your daughter watched." He got defensive immediately. "You always exaggerate." "No," I replied, "I just finally stopped covering for you." Silence. Then he hung up. Frank continued digging through financial records. And one evening he arrived carrying a thick folder under his arm. "Found something interesting," he announced. My mother raised an eyebrow. "That usually means expensive." Frank sat down heavily. "Kayla dated another business owner in Georgia about 3 years ago." I looked up. "What?" She left when the money dried up. Did she steal from him? Frank shrugged. Nothing dramatic, unpaid bills, maxed cards, some missing electronics. Mostly she just disappeared. My mother leaned back slowly. So Wayne thinks he won a prize when really he adopted a raccoon. Frank grinned. More or less. But the truth was none of that made me feel victorious yet. Some nights after work I sat in the guest room staring at creditor letters, while fear crawled up my throat like smoke. What if Wayne ruined us completely? What if I spent the next decade cleaning up debt I didn't even understand? One morning at Buc-ee's, I locked myself in the bathroom after getting another notice in the mail. I sat on the closed toilet lid wearing a hairnet and apron, crying quietly into paper towels. 48 years old? Working at a gas station bakery. Buried in debt because I trusted my husband. A knock came at the door. Marlene's voice floated through. You alive in there? Barely. She sighed dramatically. Honey, I don't know what man caused this situation, but I hope he gets audited by Jesus. I laughed so suddenly it startled me. Then I wiped my face, fixed my apron, and walked back out. And somewhere between the cinnamon rolls and the legal paperwork and my daughter feeding horses in the mountains, I started understanding something important. Wayne hadn't destroyed me. He'd just forced me to finally see how much of myself I'd been giving away. By the time October rolled around, the leaves in Asheville had started turning copper and gold. Tourists crowded the Blue Ridge Parkway every weekend, taking photos like they'd personally discovered autumn. Meanwhile, I spent most mornings making biscuits at Buc-ee's, and most evenings sitting at my mother's kitchen table sorting legal paperwork with Frank. That became my life for a while. Not glamorous, not inspiring, just steady. And honestly, steady started feeling better than exciting. Then Patricia called. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity gets stronger with age, not weaker. I picked up while standing in the baking aisle at Ingles Market holding a bag of flour. Her voice came smooth and sugary as artificial sweetener. Deborah, I wanted to let you know Wayne will be attending the East Tennessee Children's Hospital Gala next month. I waited. And, well, she continued carefully, people in Knoxville do talk. I thought it would be easier for everyone if you stayed away. I actually smiled. Not because it was funny. Because after everything that had happened, Patricia still thought appearances were the same thing as reality. Patricia, I said calmly, if your son's behavior embarrasses you, that sounds like a family issue. Then I hung up. That night my mother listened quietly while I told her about the call. We were shelling pecans at the kitchen table while Emily worked on math homework nearby. Evelyn didn't even look up. We're going. I blinked. To the gala? Of course. I'm not going there. Yes, you are. I laughed nervously. Mom, those people already think I'm pathetic. She finally raised her eyes. Honey, you worked 30 years, raised a child, survived betrayal, and rebuilt your life from scratch. The pathetic people are the ones pretending infidelity is sophistication. Emily looked up from her homework. What's sophistication? My mother answered immediately. Something rich people confuse with cruelty. Frank arrived 2 days later carrying another folder thick enough to stop a bullet. He dropped it onto the dining room table. Well, he said your ex-son-in-law may officially be the dumbest businessman in Knox County. He's not my ex-son-in-law yet, my mother replied. Frank shrugged. Emotionally, he's deceased. Turns out Wayne had been trying to secure new investments for his company while quietly moving equipment and money through accounts connected to Kayla. Not illegal on the surface, but suspicious enough that once people started asking questions, things got uncomfortable quickly. Frank prepared formal legal notices regarding the debt exposure tied to my name and sent copies to Wayne's attorney, accountant, and several business contacts. One of those contacts happened to sit on the board organizing the hospital gala. That mattered. Not because Frank wanted public humiliation. Because wealthy people hate financial scandal at charity events. Especially Southern wealthy people. There's nothing they fear more than embarrassment near a shrimp tower. The gala was held on a Saturday evening at the Knoxville Country Club. I almost backed out 3 times that afternoon. At one point, I stood in my mother's guest room staring at myself in the mirror thinking maybe Patricia was right. Maybe I should stay invisible. But then Emily walked in wearing a pale blue dress my mother bought her and said, "You look nice, Mom." That nearly undid me. Because for months my daughter had watched me cry, watched me panic over bills, watched me doubt myself. And now she was looking at me like maybe I wasn't broken anymore. So I took a breath and finished getting dressed. Nothing flashy. Simple navy dress. Low heels. My mother's pearl earrings. When I came downstairs, Evelyn looked me over carefully. "You don't need sparkle," she said. "You brought receipts." Even Frank laughed at that. The country club looked exactly the way places like that always do. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, women pretending not to judge each other while absolutely judging each other. The second we walked inside, I felt eyes turn toward me. Whispers moved quietly through the room like wind through dry grass. I spotted Wayne near the bar almost immediately. And honestly, he looked older. Not physically, spiritually. Like stress had finally started collecting payment. Then I saw Kayla beside him in a tight red dress holding a champagne glass like she'd practiced it in a mirror. Patricia stood nearby greeting people with the desperate smile of a woman trying to hold a collapsing picture frame together with tape. Wayne noticed me first. His entire body stiffened. Kayla turned next. For half a second, genuine panic crossed her face before she replaced it with that fake, sweet smile again. "Well," she said brightly as we approached Deborah, "you look comfortable." I smiled politely. "And you look expensive. I hope somebody kept the receipt." Frank coughed violently into his hand to hide a laugh. Even Evelyn smirked. Patricia stepped forward immediately. "This really isn't the place for unpleasantness." My mother answered before I could. "Patricia, bless your heart. You still think silence and dignity are the same thing." Wayne looked exhausted already. "Can we not do this tonight?" Frank adjusted his suspenders calmly. "That depends entirely on your financial records." Wayne's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. Before he could respond, a tall, older man approached, holding a bourbon glass. Harold Benson. Local investor. Known around Knoxville for donating hospital wings and firing people without blinking. Wayne Harold said casually, "I received some concerning paperwork this afternoon." The room around us seemed to quiet slightly. Wayne forced a laugh. "Harold, now's probably not the time." "I disagree," Harold replied, "especially since your company sponsored tonight's event." Kayla shifted uncomfortably beside him. Harold continued calmly. "Is it true company assets were transferred while debt tied to your wife remained active?" Nobody spoke. Not even Patricia. Wayne glanced toward me. Then Frank. Then back to Harold. "It's being handled." "That's not what I asked." A few nearby guests had gone completely silent now. One woman slowly lowered her wine glass halfway to her mouth and never finished the sip. Frank stepped forward and handed Wayne a sealed envelope. "Formal notice," he said quietly. Wayne stared at it like it was radioactive. Kayla suddenly grabbed his arm. "You told me everything was already settled." "Kayla." "No," she snapped louder this time. "You said the business was fine." Patricia hissed under her breath. "Lower your voice." Kayla turned on her immediately. "Don't start with me, Patricia. Your son promised me things too." And there it was. The crack. Once it opened, everything started falling through. Harold stepped back slowly. A couple across the room pretended to study auction items while very obviously listening. Wayne looked at me desperately. "Deb, can we talk privately?" For a moment, old instincts kicked in. The urge to protect him. To smooth things over. 22 years doesn't disappear overnight. But then I remembered Emily standing in that hallway clutching her stuffed rabbit while her father chose another woman over her peace. And something inside me settled. Calmly. Finally. "You spent years teaching me to survive disappointment," I told him quietly. "Looks like I learned." Wayne swallowed hard. "I never wanted this." I looked around the room. At Kayla. At Patricia. At the investors backing away one by one. Then back at him. "Yes," I said softly, "you did." Right then, Emily walked past us holding my mother's hand. Wayne's expression cracked completely. "Emmy." She paused for half a second. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just tired. Then she kept walking. And somehow that silence hit harder than anything else said all night. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, the mornings in Asheville carried that sharp mountain cold that settles into your bones before sunrise. I'd gotten used to waking up around 4:30 without an alarm. Years of worrying will train your body better than any clock ever could. Most mornings I stood alone in my mother's kitchen tying on an apron while biscuit dough rested beneath a dish towel beside the stove. The house always sounded different before dawn. Quiet heater humming. Floorboards creaking softly. Coffee dripping into the pot one slow drop at a time. Peace has small sounds when you haven't heard it in a long while. Emily usually came downstairs around 6:30 before school sleepy-eyed and wrapped in oversized sweatshirts. She'd started laughing more by then, sleeping through the night too. That mattered more to me than anything happening to Wayne. And plenty was happening to Wayne. Not all at once. Real life rarely collapses in one dramatic explosion. It comes apart gradually. Bills first, then reputation, then the people who only loved your success. Frank kept me updated on the legal mess every week or so. Wayne's business lost 2 commercial contracts after word spread about the financial investigation. Creditors started circling harder after discovering equipment transfers tied to outside accounts. The house in Knoxville eventually had to be listed for sale. Apparently, Kayla was furious about that. According to Frank, she'd believed Wayne was far wealthier than he actually was, which honestly explained a lot. One afternoon, while I was boxing pecan pie orders for a local coffee shop, Frank stopped by carrying his usual stack of folders. He accepted coffee, sat heavily at the kitchen table, and sighed. Well, he announced Miss Kayla has officially evacuated the battlefield. My mother looked up from clipping coupons. She left. Packed up and disappeared sometime Tuesday. I kept sealing pie boxes quietly, Frank continued. Took a television, a designer handbag Wayne apparently financed like a fool, and possibly a set of expensive golf clubs. My mother snorted softly. Nature is healing. Even I laughed at that. Not cruelly, just tired. Because somewhere along the way, Wayne had stopped feeling like the love of my life and started feeling like a man sprinting through a storm carrying gasoline. Every bad decision fed the next one. A week later, Patricia finally called me directly. Not to argue, not to defend Wayne, to apologize. I stared at the voicemail notification for nearly an hour before listening to it. Her voice sounded older somehow, smaller. Deborah, I suppose I owe you an apology. I handled things poorly. Emily didn't deserve... She paused. None of it should have happened the way it did. That was as close to accountability as Patricia Collins would probably ever come. My mother looked at me while I held the phone silently. You gonna answer? I thought about it, then shook my head. Number. Good. Not because I hated Patricia. I didn't anymore. Hate requires energy I no longer wanted to spend. The truth was simpler than that. I was done carrying people who only loved me when I made their lives easier. That winter, my little baking side business slowly started growing. Nothing huge, just enough. Word spread through Asheville church groups and local Facebook pages about the lady with the cinnamon rolls. Every Friday morning, I delivered boxes to a coffee shop downtown near Pack Square. The owner, a woman named Celia, started asking for extra biscuits because they kept selling out before noon. One snowy morning, she handed me cash and said, "You know, these remind people of their grandmothers, right?" I smiled. "That's probably the butter." "No," she said softly, "it's the comfort." That stayed with me, because comfort was something I used to think came from stability, marriage, routine, a house. But standing there covered in flour at 48 years old, rebuilding my life one pie crust at a time, I realized comfort actually comes from safety and honesty and waking up without fear sitting on your chest. That realization took me a long time to earn. The strangest part was that healing didn't happen dramatically either. There wasn't one magical morning where I suddenly felt strong. It came in pieces. The first time I laughed without guilt. The first paycheck I earned entirely for myself. The first night I realized I hadn't thought about Kayla once all day. The first morning Emily stopped checking my face to see if I'd been crying. Those tiny moments matter more than revenge ever does. Even my relationship with my mother slowly changed. One evening near Christmas, we sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets while snow dusted the pasture fence. "I should have listened to you years ago," I admitted quietly. Evelyn shook her head. "No, you should have listened to yourself years ago." That one hit deep. Because she was right. There had been signs, so many signs. The criticism, the isolation, the way Wayne slowly made my world smaller while convincing me it was love. But hindsight's a sharp knife, no point sleeping with it. A few days after New Year's, Frank called with another update. Wayne's renting a duplex outside Maryville now. I stared out the kitchen window while he talked. He asked about Emily. Every time. That hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, part of me still remembered the younger version of Wayne. The man who taught Emily how to ride a bike. The man who held my hand when my father died. People don't become monsters all at once. Sometimes they just keep choosing selfishness until there's nothing decent left standing. That grief stayed complicated. And maybe it always will. One morning near the end of January, I was rolling biscuit dough before sunrise when I noticed my wedding ring sitting in the little ceramic dish beside the sink. I'd taken it off months earlier without thinking. But there it still sat, gold dulled slightly under the kitchen light. For a long moment I just stared at it. 22 years. A child. A whole life. Then I picked it up carefully and placed it inside a plain white envelope. On the front I wrote 2 words. Old life. Emily wandered downstairs a minute later, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked at the envelope. "What's that?" I smiled a little. Just something I don't need to carry anymore." She nodded like she understood more than a child should. Then she wrapped her arms around my waist while biscuit dough covered my hands. "Are we okay now?" she asked softly. I looked around the kitchen, at the flour on the counter, at the early morning light creeping through the windows, at my mother humming somewhere upstairs, and for the first time in a very long while the answer came easily. "No, baby," I said. "We're better than okay, we're honest." If you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, especially later in life, then you already know healing doesn't happen quickly. But it does happen, quietly, piece by piece. And sometimes the hardest endings make room for the most peaceful beginnings. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where you found your strength. And if you'd like more stories like this one, stay a while.